a lie so deeply embedded in your psyche that you mistake it for truth. The lie whispers, "If I could just be good enough, pure enough, selfless enough, then I would be worthy of love." But here's what Jung knew that most of us refuse to accept. Your relentless pursuit of goodness isn't making you more lovable, it's making you invisible. To others, and most tragically, to yourself. You don't keep attracting people who can't see your worth because you're unlucky. You do it because your shadow, that disowned part of yourself that contains your rage, your selfishness, your raw hunger for life, is begging to be seen. And when you refuse to look, you unconsciously seek others who will mirror back what you've rejected in yourself. Think about it. When was the last time you felt truly, authentically powerful? Not the manufactured power of people-pleasing or the hollow victory of moral superiority, but the deep, cellular knowing that you matter simply because you exist. Most of us can't remember because we've been taught that power and goodness are mutually exclusive. But Jung understood something revolutionary. The very qualities we've been taught to despise in ourselves, our selfishness, our darkness, our capacity for destruction, these aren't obstacles to our power. They are the raw material from which authentic power is forged. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your buried treasure. This isn't about becoming selfish or cruel. This is about becoming whole. Because when you stop trying to be good and start trying to be real, something extraordinary happens. You stop attracting people who need you to be small, and you start magnetizing those who can handle your full spectrum of humanity. The person who claims to have no shadow is the most dangerous person in the room. The person who acknowledges their darkness and learns to dance with it, that's someone who can be trusted with real intimacy, real power, real love. So let me ask you this. Are you ready to stop being good and start being powerful? Are you ready to meet the parts of yourself you've been hiding from, not to destroy them, but to integrate them into a more authentic, more magnetic version of who you are? Because the journey we're about to take together isn't about becoming a better person. It's about becoming a real person. And real people messy, complex, shadowed real people are the ones who change the world. You see her across the coffee shop, and something in your chest tightens. She's laughing too loudly, taking up too much space, demanding attention in a way that makes your skin crawl. How narcissistic. You think, feeling superior in your quiet corner, your small, acceptable presence. But Jung would lean forward and whisper, "What you condemn in others, you repress in yourself." This is projection, the unconscious mechanism by which we cast our disowned parts onto other people and then judge them for carrying what we refuse to acknowledge. It's perhaps the most insidious form of self-betrayal because it feels so righteous, so justified. Let me tell you about Nina. Nina had a pattern that baffled her friends and frustrated her therapist. She kept attracting men who were emotionally unavailable, who would shower her with attention in the beginning only to pull away just as she was getting attached. "I just have bad luck with men," she'd say. "I'm too giving, too trusting." But when Nina finally did her shadow work, she discovered something that shattered her victim narrative. She was terrified of true intimacy. The unavailable men weren't happening to her. She was unconsciously choosing them because they allowed her to feel loving and open, without the actual risk of being fully seen. The very unavailability she criticized in them was a reflection of her own emotional unavailability. She had projected her fear of intimacy onto them, and then attracted exactly what she had disowned in herself. This is how projection works. The qualities that trigger you most intensely in others aren't random. They're precise reflections of your own rejected aspects. The person who annoys you by being too needy is showing you your own unacknowledged hunger for connection. The colleague who irritates you by being too ambitious is mirroring your own suppressed desires for success and recognition. What does this person trigger in me that I haven't healed? This is the question that transforms projection from unconscious compulsion into conscious choice. When you find yourself in the grip of judgment, pause. Feel the charge in your body. Notice where you contract, where you feel superior or disgusted. That contraction is your shadow trying to get your attention. Consider Marcus, a man who prided himself on being humble and self-effacing. He was constantly irritated by people he perceived as arrogant or self-promotional. But when he began to explore his shadow, he discovered that underneath his humility was a deep shame about his own ambitions and a terror of being seen as too much. His irritation with arrogant people was actually envy, a longing for the freedom to take up space, to be seen, to own his desires without apology. Once he could acknowledge this, he stopped attracting arrogant people as romantic partners and started attracting confident people who could model healthy self-advocacy. The shadow doesn't just influence who we attract, it determines what we're capable of receiving. When you judge others for being selfish, you block your own ability to receive generosity. When you criticize others for being emotional, you shut down your own capacity for depth and passion. Every judgment is a door closing. Every integration is a door opening. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But this isn't just intellectual understanding, it's soul-level recognition. When you can look at someone who triggers you and say, "I see you, and I see myself in you," something magical happens. The charge dissolves, the compulsion ends, the pattern breaks. This is the beginning of conscious relationship, not just with others, but with the hidden parts of yourself. Because until you can love your own shadow, you'll keep attracting people who force you to confront it in all the most uncomfortable ways. Your shadow was born in the first moment you learned that parts of yourself were unacceptable. Maybe you were 3 years old, reaching for your mother's attention while she was on the phone, and she snapped, "Don't be so selfish." Maybe you were 5, crying because you were scared, and your father said, "Stop being such a baby." In that moment, you made a soul-level decision. If I want to be loved, I must not be selfish. I must not be vulnerable. I must not be too much. And so you began the long process of self-amputation, cutting away the parts of yourself that felt too risky, too big, too real. You learned to be the good child, the helpful friend, the self-sacrificing partner. You became an expert at reading rooms and morphing yourself into whatever shape would earn love and avoid abandonment. But here's what no one tells you about shadow work. Those rejected parts of yourself didn't disappear. They went underground, where they've been growing stronger and more distorted in the darkness. Your suppressed anger became passive aggression. Your disowned neediness became unconscious manipulation. Your rejected power became self-sabotage. Sarah learned this the hard way. She had built her entire identity around being the easygoing one, the person who never caused problems or made demands. She was proud of her ability to go with the flow, to put others' needs before her own. But her relationships kept ending the same way, with partners who said they felt like they never really knew her, like she was always performing rather than being real. The shadow work began when Sarah started paying attention to her dreams. Night after night, she dreamed of a wild woman who screamed and demanded and took up space without apology. During the day, Sarah would wake up feeling ashamed of these dreams, trying to push them away. But they kept coming back stronger. In therapy, Sarah began to understand that the wild woman in her dreams wasn't her enemy, she was her disowned power. All the anger Sarah had never expressed, all the desires she had never voiced, all the space she had never claimed, it was all there, waiting to be integrated. The process of shadow integration isn't comfortable. It requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. You must learn to love both your people-pleasing tendencies and your selfish impulses. You must embrace both your need for connection and your need for independence. You must hold space for both your gentle heart and your fierce boundaries. This is where shadow work becomes practical. It's not enough to intellectually understand your projections. You must develop a living relationship with your disowned parts. Start with mirror work. Look into your own eyes and speak to the parts of yourself you've been hiding from. I see you, angry one. I see you, needy one. I see you, selfish one. Notice what happens in your body. Notice the shame, the fear, the urge to look away. Breathe into it. These parts of yourself have been waiting your whole life to be acknowledged. Track your emotional reactions throughout the day. When you feel triggered, ask yourself, what part of me is this person representing that I haven't fully owned? When you feel superior to someone, ask, what am I trying to distance myself from? When you feel inferior, ask, what power am I giving away that belongs to me? The goal isn't to become your shadow, it's to become conscious of it. When you can acknowledge your capacity for selfishness without acting it out unconsciously, you gain the power to choose when and how to advocate for yourself. When you can own your neediness without being controlled by it, you gain the ability to ask for what you want directly rather than manipulating others to give it to you. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Your shadow contains not just your rejected darkness, but your rejected light. All the power you've given away, all the gifts you've been too afraid to claim, all the brilliance you've been too humble to own, it's all there in the shadow, waiting to be reclaimed. The most dangerous person isn't the one who knows they have darkness, it's the one who believes they don't. Because unconscious shadow always acts out in the most destructive ways. The person who has never owned their capacity for cruelty becomes unconsciously cruel. The person who has never acknowledged their need for control becomes a covert controller. But when you can look at your shadow and say, yes, I have the capacity for destruction, and I choose how to use this power, you become truly trustworthy. When you can say, yes, I have needs and desires, and I will express them directly rather than manipulating others to meet them, you become truly intimate. This is the paradox of shadow work. You must become more selfish to become truly generous. You must own your capacity for destruction to become truly creative. You must embrace your darkness to access your authentic light. The moment you stop trying to be good and start trying to be real, everything changes. But this transition feels like death at first, because in many ways it is. You're killing the false self that has been your survival strategy for decades. Jung understood that true transformation requires what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox without collapsing into either extreme. You must learn to be both strong and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both self-focused and other-aware. This is where the real work begins. Reprogramming your nervous system for authentic intimacy instead of codependent connection. Consider the difference. Codependent connection says, I will make myself small so you can feel big. Authentic intimacy says, I will show up as my full self and invite you to do the same. Codependent connection is driven by fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being too much. Authentic intimacy is driven by love. Love of truth, love of growth, love of what's possible when two whole people choose each other. The reprogramming begins with what Jung called active imagination, the practice of consciously dialoguing with different parts of yourself. You must learn to be your own good parent, the one who never existed or who couldn't show up when you needed them most. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. This is about radical self-acceptance. It's about looking at the parts of yourself that are hungry for attention and saying, I see you, and your needs matter. It's about acknowledging the parts that are terrified of abandonment and saying, I will never leave you, even when others do. Inner reparenting is the foundation of conscious relationship because it stops you from trying to get your childhood needs met by adult partners. When you can give yourself the unconditional love you've been seeking, you stop attracting people who can't give it to you and start attracting people who can match your level of self-love. But reparenting isn't just about soothing your inner child, it's about setting boundaries with your inner child. The part of you that wants to be loved no matter what needs to learn that your value isn't negotiable. The part of you that's terrified of being alone needs to learn that you can handle solitude without disappearing. This is where boundary work becomes crucial. But not the kind of boundaries you've been taught, the walls that keep people out. These are conscious boundaries, the kind that keep you in. They're internal structures that help you maintain your sense of self in the presence of others. A conscious boundary sounds like, I notice I'm starting to lose myself in this conversation. I need to check in with what I actually think and feel. Or, I can see that you're in pain, and I care about you, but I won't take responsibility for managing your emotions. These boundaries aren't cruel, they're loving. They protect your capacity for genuine intimacy by ensuring that you remain present to yourself even when you're focused on others. As Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is nowhere more true than in relationships. When you're unconscious of your patterns, you keep attracting the same types of people and having the same types of conflicts. You call it bad luck or incompatibility, but it's actually your psyche trying to heal itself through repetition. When you become conscious of your patterns, you gain the power to choose differently. You stop attracting people who need you to be small and start attracting people who can handle your full presence. You stop being drawn to people who trigger your wounds and start being drawn to people who mirror your healing. This doesn't mean you only attract healed people. Healing is a lifelong process. It means you attract people who are committed to their own growth, who can take responsibility for their own shadows, who can meet you in the space of conscious evolution. The person who has integrated their shadow shows up differently in relationship. They don't need you to be perfect because they've made peace with their own imperfections. They don't need you to meet all their needs because they've learned to meet many of their own. They don't need you to complete them because they've learned to be whole on their own. This is the foundation of conscious love. Two whole people choosing each other not out of neediness, but out of genuine appreciation for who the other person is. It's love based on reality rather than projection, on choice rather than compulsion. When you stop trying to be good and start trying to be real, you discover something remarkable. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love. You just need to be honest about who you are and committed to your own growth. And that honesty, that commitment to truth over comfort, is incredibly attractive to other people who are on the same journey. You stand at the threshold of a new way of being. Behind you lies the familiar territory of people-pleasing, of making yourself small to earn love, of projecting your disowned parts onto others and then wondering why your relationships feel so chaotic. Ahead of you lies the unknown landscape of authentic power, of conscious relationship, of love that sees and accepts the whole of who you are. This is the moment of choice that Jung called the confrontation with the self, the decision to stop living from your ego's need to be good and start living from your soul's need to be real. When you choose realness over righteousness, something profound shifts in your energetic field. You stop broadcasting the frequency of, please love me despite my flaws, and start emanating the frequency of, I am worthy of love exactly as I am. This shift is palpable to others, even when they can't consciously identify what's different about you. The person who has integrated their shadow carries a particular kind of presence. They're comfortable with silence because they're comfortable with themselves. They can hold space for others' emotions without taking responsibility for them. They can speak their truth without needing others to agree with it. They can love without losing themselves in the process. This is what conscious love looks like in practice. It's not the desperate clinging of codependency or the cold detachment of avoidance. It's the warm, steady presence of someone who knows their own worth and doesn't need external validation to maintain it. In conscious love, conflict becomes a tool for deeper intimacy rather than a threat to the relationship. When you're not trying to be good, you can acknowledge when you're being selfish or petty or afraid. You can say, I notice I'm being triggered right now, and this is probably more about my stuff than yours. You can take responsibility for your projections without collapsing into shame. This kind of radical honesty creates safety in relationship, not the false safety of avoiding difficult conversations, but the real safety of knowing that nothing is off limits, that no part of you is unacceptable, that you can be fully seen and still be loved. The relationships you attract from this place are fundamentally different. They're based on mutual respect rather than mutual need. They're characterized by interdependence rather than dependence. They're spaces where both people can continue growing and evolving without threatening the connection. This doesn't mean these relationships are easy or conflict-free. It means they're real. And real relationships, like real people, are messy and beautiful and complex and worth fighting for. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." In conscious love, you're not trying to avoid being transformed by the other person. You're not trying to remain unchanged. You're opening yourself to the alchemy of authentic connection, trusting that whatever emerges from the meeting of two whole people will be more beautiful than what either of you could create alone. This is the gift of shadow integration. It doesn't just heal your relationship with yourself, it heals your capacity for true intimacy with others. When you can love your own darkness, you can love others' darkness too. When you can accept your own neediness, you can meet others' needs without resentment. When you can own your own power, you can celebrate others' power without feeling threatened. The journey from people-pleasing to authentic presence is not a destination but a practice. Every day, you'll have moments where you want to collapse back into the familiar patterns of making yourself small. Every day, you'll have opportunities to choose truth over comfort, realness over righteousness. This is the work of a lifetime, and it's the most important work you'll ever do. Because when you stop trying to be good and start trying to be real, you don't just change your own life, you give others permission to do the same. You become a beacon of possibility, showing others what's available when we stop hiding from ourselves. The world doesn't need more good people. It needs more real people. People who can acknowledge their capacity for both creation and destruction and choose consciously which one to express. People who can own their needs without becoming entitled, their power without becoming dominating, their sensitivity without becoming victims. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole, and wholeness includes everything: the light and the shadow, the strength and the vulnerability, the selfishness and the generosity. When you can embrace all of it, when you can love all of it, you become truly powerful. Not the power that dominates others, but the power that inspires them. Not the power that needs to be right, but the power that chooses to be real. Not the power that comes from being good, but the power that comes from being fully, authentically, courageously human. This is your invitation. This is your calling. This is your path back to the wholeness you were born with before the world taught you to fragment yourself for love. You are not a good person. You are something far more valuable than that. You are a real person. And real people, when they learn to love themselves completely, have the power to change everything. If you're ready to stop chasing what hurts and start creating what heals, if you're ready to stop making yourself small and start claiming your full presence, if you're ready to stop being good and start being powerful, then your journey begins now. The shadow you've been running from is not your enemy. It's your untapped power waiting to be claimed. The darkness you've been avoiding is not your weakness. It's your strength, waiting to be integrated. The parts of yourself you've been hiding are not your shame. They're your gifts, waiting to be shared. Your wholeness is not a destination, it's a practice. Your power is not a prize to be won, it's a birthright to be claimed. Your love is not a commodity to be earned, it's a force to be embodied. The world is waiting for you to stop being good and start being real. The question is, are you ready to answer the call? If you're ready to embrace your shadow and claim your power, type this in the comments. I am the love I seek. Let this be your declaration of independence from the tyranny of goodness and your commitment to the radical act of being fully, authentically, powerfully yourself. The journey begins with a single step into the darkness you've been avoiding. And in that darkness, you'll find not your destruction, but your deepest truth. Not your enemy, but your greatest ally. Not your weakness, but your ultimate power. You are not a good person. You are something infinitely more valuable. You are a whole person. And whole people have the power to heal the world, starting with themselves.